Okay, welcome back everyone. In this video, I'm going to explain how the for loop works, and that is a lead into using sprite groups. This will allow us to create many sprites all at once. For example, if we want to populate a game with mobs or bad guys, or perhaps when we create bits of level backgrounds that will all string together for making a side scroller, something like this. I'm going to use it in Space Potaters for making many aliens at once, and also for creating the shields at the bottom of the screen. So let's get started. In order to understand and create groups of sprites, many sprites at a time, we need to use a for loop. And we're familiar with loops already. We've used the draw loop extensively, and you can think of the draw loop as a forever loop. It will continue to loop forever. There are different types of loops though, and if you need a loop that will execute the commands inside of it, and you know how many times you want those commands to be executed, then the for loop is the one you want. I've got a really short program here, and the lines 2, 3, and 4, I'm just setting text size and fill and stroke. We then go into the for loop. You'll see right away we have in parentheses after the for, we have 3 arguments. One thing to note right off the bat is that those arguments are separated by semicolons. That's the proper syntax in JavaScript. Be aware of that. We separate these with semicolons. We do not separate them with commas or something else. The first argument initializes a variable, declares and assigns a value to it. Oftentimes we use the variable I. That's just a convention, but that is a variable, the counting variable that we'll use to tell the machine how many times to go through the for loop. So we start I at 0. The second argument sets the limit of I. So long as our variable is less than, and I have it set at 100 now, then it will continue to loop. And the third argument is the increment of the variable each time through the loop. So this is the counter pattern. It's the same as saying I equals I plus 1. So every time we get to the end of the loop and we start over again, I will be incremented by 1. So the first time through the loop, I is 0. We set the background to white, and we write some text to the screen, and then we loop, and I becomes 1, and then we set the background to white and write the text to the screen, and then I becomes 2, and so on and so on. And so in that way, we will go 100 times through the for loop. From 0 to 99 is what I will do. Now the kicker is that we can use that variable I. This is a local variable, and you can only use it inside the for loop, but we can use that variable in these commands. And so what I've done just to demonstrate is I've used I here in the text block. So what will happen is the value stored in I, that number, will be written to the screen. Now the thing to remember here is that the computer is very fast, right? So it's going to loop through this basically instantaneously. So when we click run, we see 99. So we didn't even see it count up from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way up to 99 because it happens too quickly. We can slow the loop down. We can put a pause in here, right here. And so every time it goes through the loop and when it comes back in increments I, it will pause and we'll be able to see it count up. So let's take a look. So I hit continue and we're at 0. So we've just gone through the for loop the first time. I is 0. Now you can see that I++ is highlighted. It's going to add 1 to I. It will check to make sure that I is less than 100. If it is, it will go through the loop again. And we see that we go to 1, and if I keep clicking continue, we will cycle through the for loop, and we're done. When we get to 99, we add 1, and I becomes 100, and then this condition here, the second argument becomes false. We skip the loop, and the program will pick up with the first line after the for loop. We can demonstrate that we exit the for loop. We can put in a couple more commands here. Copy these. And let's go ahead and watch that. So after we loop 100 times through the for loop, it'll spit us out, turn the background white, and we'll see the word done appear. And there it is. We've exited the loop. That's it. That's how the for loop works. We can change the arguments to loop any number of times through the for loop. So again, this is when we know how many times we want to execute a sequence of commands. Let's take a look at another example. So here I have another for loop. This is going from I equals 1 to I less than 10. So that will execute this ellipse command 9 times, since we're incrementing I by 1 each time through the loop. And by the way, you can increment I, or your variable here, by any number. You can do I equals I plus 2 or I plus equals 10 or whatever. And that's useful because when you use I in the commands inside of the for loop, sometimes you don't want I increasing by 1 each time. Depending on what you're doing, you might want to increase I by some other number. So here I have an ellipse, and I'm using I in the X and the Y coordinate. So the first time through the loop, I is 1, so we're going to have an ellipse at 40, 40, and then I becomes 2, and we'll have an ellipse at 80, 80, and so on. We should get circles that move diagonally down our screen. So in this way, you can create many shapes at once, and we can create many sprites at once. Let's take a look at how we create groups of sprite. Okay, so here we are in the draw loop, and I first have created a variable called fragnum. Don't ask why. That was just I just copied and pasted this from a program that I had written for my interactive card assignment example. So we create a variable, and I assigned it 100. So I'm going to create 100 sprites at a time. I'm going to use that variable down here in the for loop, I less than fragnum. So that's equal to 100. We go into the draw loop, we set the background white, and we're going to create these sprites when we hit the spacebar. The first thing inside of this if statement is a variable that I create, kiss equals create group. So this just creates a group, and I'm going to populate that group by creating sprites and adding them to the group. And in this way, then I can execute commands on every one of those 100 sprites all at the same time. So it's very useful. We go then into the for loop. So again, we create our variable I equals 0, I less than 100, I plus plus, incremented by 1 each time. And then there's only one command here in the for loop, and this creates a sprite, and it adds that sprite to my group. This is what the meaning of this kiss.addCreateSprite block. Okay, so we create 100 sprites, we add them to the group, and then we pop out of the for loop. Since all of these sprites belong to this group, we can apply the same command to them all at once. So I set kiss.setAnimation each. I set their animation for all 100 in one command. I set the scale for all 100 sprites in one more command. And then I set their speed and direction, so they're moving some direction with some speed that's chosen randomly, and we play a sound. Let's take a look at how it looks. Okay, so I'm going to hit the spacebar, and I get 100 different sprites set with a random speed and direction and random locations. That was almost the same speed and direction, but there it goes. You can see that it's different each time. Each time I hit the spacebar, 100 sprites. So in this way, we can create many, many, many sprites. We can change their properties for all of them at the same time. And we can do other things, like we can figure out if one of them has collided with another, the player character, and so on. So this is going to become very useful as we move forward to be able to create many sprites and execute commands on all of them at once. That's all for this one. Thanks for watching this interlude, and we'll see you in the next episode.